Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of the Monsters Den. Alongside in the co-captain's chair, Mr. Dan Brown from the warehouse in Newburgh, New York. What's going on, Dan?
The usual thing. Cold. What's it, like 6 degrees out here today in
Hey,
New
I don't
York?
know. I think they said a high of 25, which is like 10 degrees warmer than it was yesterday, but then snow tonight. So yeah, it's winter time here in New York,
Or
right?
the one of my lines freezing up at the restaurant. I'm good.
There you go.
Just borderline. But that life's been good. Can't complain. Things are kind of normal, and I enjoy this thing doing the silent film horror.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Today, so we are going to be talking about and picking our 5 favorite silent genre films. And for those of you who are probably thinking, oh, silent movies, geez, that's going way back. That is right. We're going way, way back. We're talking like films, some of these 100 years old, but pretty damn good. I find especially, I think limiting it to 5 was a challenge because as Dan and I were both talking before we started taping here, it's like there's easily, for me anyway, 10 to 12 that are prime to discuss, but it was interesting trying to pick my 5 favorites. I think I've got them, but then I watched a couple others this morning. I'm like, oh, those are pretty good too. So we'll save those for the honorable mentions. But again, we're going way back here. So, and for those of you who maybe have not watched any of these silent classics in recent years, and we'll talk about them, I'm sure, during each of our picks. There are some fantastic restorations of these extremely old and fragile films that if you've seen some of these and maybe you saw them 30 years ago and you're like, oh my God, you could barely see what's going on, dark and grainy with rips and tears and all this kind of stuff, really should give some of these Blu-ray, which are made from 4K and 2K scans of restorations, a chance, because some of these films, watching them today on these new Blu-rays, are astounding in how good they look considering how old they are. So with all that being said, we'll have Dan kick us off with his number 5 pick.
Okay, well, my number 5 pick, and like yourself, I have some honorable mentions, but my number 5 pick just came out of left field today. Silent films, I think silent films, when you say about horror, it's not necessarily horror, it's more atmosphere. And there's nobody with a machete, there's nobody running around with an axe. And the thing about it is that you start watching these films, and some films have just a little bit of a nuance that makes them great. Well, this film today I saw, it's kind of connected in with another film I'm going to say today, but it's called Maciste in Hell from 1925. Now, interestingly enough, the Maciste character is a character that started in an Italian silent film called Cabria as a muscular, like Hercules type of guy. And he was cast in the part, was a fellow by the name of, what's his name? Bartolomeo Pagano, who was like a dock worker. And they put him in this big epic film in a small role, and people loved him, I guess his physique or whatever, but it spawned in his career like over 24 Maciste films, in which he was this muscular guy, but he wasn't necessarily in ancient Rome. One day there'd be a movie called Maciste Goes on Vacation. Someone's going to get their ass kicked somewhere along the line, but he did like 25 films, retired. His character was so popular in Italy that in the 1960s, when they were distributing a lot of those Peplum Musclemen films in the drive-ins in the 60s, they were originally named for European distribution as Maciste because he was a name brand. Like a Santo.
How does he spell that? How do you spell that?
Macchiste. I think
Gotcha.
But yeah, and it spawned a whole series. But the point I'm making is this was like one of the last ones he did. And it's called Maciste in Hell. I knew of this film for years. I had it on a really bad VHS. I never paid much attention to it. And all of a sudden I put it on this morning, and he's this muscle man in a small town that, I don't know, he's approached by Pluto and the underlords of hell to come wreak havoc with them. And he basically says, no, not today. And he just walks away. And next thing you know, they finally get him in hell. And then and all hell breaks loose. I mean, it's wild. There are
I'm looking at
demons
some
who knock
stills right now. This looks
Oh.
this looks amazing. I'm like, I've
He
never heard of
knocks
it.
people's heads off. You see them with super special effects, putting them back on. One guy he punches so hard his head deflates like a football bladder, and all of a sudden it blows back up. It's all everybody's in. There's tones and red. And this guy's huge, and he just goes. It's as if if you threw all right. If it was End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but he wasn't a depressed, suicidal, alcoholic cop. He was just like the Terminator, and he just went around and just goes against Gabriel Byrne and all the demons and just kicks ass and takes no prisoners. It's hilarious. And that's why I just fell in love with it, because the makeup, special effects, and you can find it on YouTube. And it's a really decent print to watch. It's available once with original Italian subtitles. It also has it with English intertitles. And like I said before, in the 60s, he was so popular, there were movies that were called Maciste in Europe. But when they brought them here, that's where you found like Hercules versus this, or Atlas, Thor, or they changed the name for an American palatable audience. But nonetheless, they were all Maciste. So interesting stuff to research. You're into that stuff. Maciste in Hell, 1925, quite the hoot. See it on YouTube.
Yeah, I've never seen that, so I'm definitely gonna check that out. I've got it marked already, so I like the stills I've seen from it, so that's all I need to see. Cool. All right, well, my number 5. If we had talked about this a year ago, it wouldn't be on my list, because I only just saw this film for the first time like a month ago, and I'd never even heard of this film, to be honest with you. So I'm surprised, because it's considered a silent classic. But Jamie Laszlo was talking about it, and I was like, oh, I've never seen that one. So I picked up the Criterion Collection Blu-ray, loved it, made my number 5. 1921's The Phantom Carriage, which I guess in Swedish called Korlaklin, or the Wagoner, okay, which I guess is the direct translation for that. This particular film was directed by Victor Storstrom, I guess, who also was the star of the film. So basically, if you can kind of take It's a Wonderful Life, which is that holiday classic that we all know and love, and kind of twist that around a bit, and definitely make it more of a creepy story, that's kind of this. So basically, the lead character who is the director, plays the lead character. He's like a father. He's got a family. He's an middle-aged guy. He's got a wife, got a child, or 2 kids, I believe. And they kind of fall on hard times. He becomes a drunk, and literally that just breaks his family apart. So his wife takes the kids, leaves him. He just becomes basically like a bum. So now he's out commiserating with all the other homeless guys who are out, drinking in the park and all this kind of stuff. And he happens to come across one of his fellow homeless alcoholics, winds up dying. And then the whole mystique of this film is that when people in this sort of place in their lives, they wind up dying, in some cases under mysterious circumstances. They actually become kind of this ghostly apparition that has a horse and carriage that actually kind of goes through and visits people who are in similar circumstances, hoping to get them to see the error of their ways. And then once someone else dies, they actually take his position away, and he can then go into the afterlife and not sit there lurking amongst the living in this carriage, so to speak. So this whole film is basically about him, and in a weird way, it's kind of almost like American Werewolf in London, where you have the main character getting constantly visited by his buddy who was already mauled and killed by a werewolf, right? So here, the main character constantly has these interactions with his former kind of, I don't even know if you want to call him a friend, but basically he's turned into this surly, angry, degenerate drunk guy. And he has the woman who works for kind of, I guess, the Salvation Army. She's kind of like a nurse, but it's like this home this new business that came up where they basically, she's like a sister, okay? And they take in homeless people, and they, help clothe them and feed them, give them a place to sleep and all that kind of stuff. So she kind of takes a liking to him and wants to help him, but he just, like, every chance he gets, he just kind of shits all over her, and he's just really not a good dude at this point in time. So this whole movie is about kind of his redemption story, or at least, that's where you get at the end. And her life kind of spiraling out of control because of all the effort she's trying to put into helping him. And it's one of those, it's kind of a horror film, but kind of not. But like you mentioned earlier, what makes it a horror film is all of the set designs and the atmosphere and the ghostly apparitions, that kind of float throughout this film. It's got really good special effects for the time. You look at it now, you're like, whatever. But I mean, this is 1921 we're talking about here. So really, really well made, atmospheric, good music. And I think that's something we probably should touch upon while we're talking about these films, is in a lot of instances, the music you may hear on modern releases for these films isn't necessarily the music that they played on these films or during these films back in the day. I mean, I can't tell you, some of the films that I'm going to talk about, I have had multiple copies of these over the years on VHS and DVD and Blu-ray and all this kind of stuff. And almost every single one of these releases have had different music on them. So that's like kind of notorious for this. But I will say the restoration on this is amazing. It still looks like a movie from the 20s, but really, really well done. Creepy, atmospheric. And apparently the great Ingmar Bergman loved this film so much that this was an inspiration for a lot of the early movies that he did in his filmography. So they call it a Dickensian ghost story and a mortality tale. That's very much what it is. Highly, highly enjoyable. It's a little bit of a slow burn, but by the time you get done watching it, you're very emotionally moved by it. And I think the technical aspects of the film, again, considering the time, really, really well done. There we go.
Well, that's funny you mention that, because that's my number 4. So I'll just add a couple of bits of trivia about the film. I'm glad to see we're on the same page with these films, and obviously Jamie Laszlo's on the same page as well somewhere. So yeah, this film is an atmospheric wise. The interesting thing about this film is, for starters, the director, he eventually came to Hollywood to work at MGM and did some actually prestigious films at MGM. But he went under the name in the U.S. as Victor Seastrom, Seastrom, or that was his English variation of his name, or for pronunciation purposes, because I don't think many people in the United States could pronounce that J with the 2 dots on the top.
Yeah, Seastrom, I don't know.
Exactly. So it's and so he came here, and he had a career, once again, like many European directors that came over here. They end up becoming neutered or basically castrated from the creativity that they had. But that aside, the great thing that makes this film so atmospheric is that, first, it was one of the earliest films done. I cannot pronounce the name of the studio in Sweden where the film was originally made, which still stands. It was one of the earliest films done there. Before that, when they would make motion pictures, they would make the film during the daytime or wherever it was they were shooting, and then they would tint the film to make it appear, if it's nighttime, was blue, yellow was sunshine, and so forth and so on. This one actually employed natural lighting. They actually there's a scene in the thing where there's a graveyard, and that was filmed outdoors at the studio, and they used natural camera lighting. And it was just tons of light to make this work, but the atmosphere is just incredible. Well done film, moves along. Yeah, it's kind of like if you watch It's a Wonderful Life, but George Bailey drowned. And that's it, the end. See you. And it's a combination of that. Great little film. That's my number 4. Peter summed it up. Worthwhile venture. On PS, by the way, Ingmar Bergman would watch this film once a year. They consider Victor Seastrom, who did this film, one of the great directors of Sweden, to the point where Ingmar Bergman, as you said, was admired him. And Ingmar Bergman cast Seastrom in his 1957 film Wild Strawberries as a professor in a main lead role. So that shows the respect that goes out to Victor Seastrom. That's my take. That's number 4, Phantom Carriage.
Yeah, a couple of comments too, because you made some really good ones. This is one of those films, I think, out of a lot of the ones that we're probably going to talk about today, because one of the issues with filming these silent movies back then was depicting nighttime scenes, as you mentioned. And I think that the Phantom Carriage is one of the few from this time period where there are scenes in the film that are really dark and they work really well because of all the things that they did to make it that way. Whereas a lot of, especially one in particular, I'm going to talk about in a little bit, where most of the scenes in the film are supposed to be at night, and it's clear as day. And they were recorded in the middle of the day because they couldn't get the cameras to work unless they had very expensive lights that they brought in to at least make it seem like it was dark, but you can see what's going on. So this film is actually a lot of scenes, especially the ones in the graveyard, where the guys are all sitting there drinking and whatnot and reminiscing and stuff. I mean, it's pretty dark, but it works.
Well, every scene works. I mean, even like in the homeless shelter or whatever it was, the SRO. Even the lighting in like this flop house where this guy lives at one point. It's dark in the corner. It's very, it's very modern. It's very much like a Val Lewton film.
Yeah.
That it's beyond the lit area. It's like, what's going on out there? And then the thing about the special effects, that was like one of the earlier successful versions of doing multiple layers on film, double exposure. And they lined it up perfectly, and that is some creepy images coming out with that character.
Yeah. So one of the first films where actually you see these like ghostly apparitions, and it actually works really, really well. It doesn't look overly fake, and they would use these types of techniques in lots of films going forward. So very groundbreaking too. And I will say, I forget her name, but the actress who plays his kind of counterpart, I don't want to call her a sister because I don't know if she technically was like a Catholic sister or something, but she was one of the women working at this Salvation Army place that took an interest in him. And she's really, really good in this film. You feel really bad for her at the end too. It's just like, oh man, without giving too much away. It's like the whole ending. I mean, this is not a happy movie by any means, but it is a good redemption story in the end. So there is a little bit of an uplift at the end, but it's at the expense of another character. So I won't get into it. You really need to watch it.
You need to watch it. Right. In other words, there's a redemption as big of an asshole as you may be. There might be bright light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, so. There might be. All right. So this next one, I had to choose this one because I think if memory serves me, this is the first ever silent movie that I think I ever saw when I was a kid. And I still really like it to this day, although I think others have jumped above it in my estimation as far as like greatness, but this is a really great one. 1925's The Phantom of the Opera. All right, directed by Rupert Julian, starring, Lon Chaney Jr. This was Universal Pictures, a very early one. And of course, we know this film has been remade a ton of times. And Dan, is this in the public domain now?
Well, yeah, it is in public domain. The only thing with silent film, to the best of my knowledge, with public domain, for example, if you had a copy of Phantom of the Opera, a original print, not digitally restored, and you want to put your own soundtrack on it, you can copyright that version with your music. But other than it's in public domain, but any restoration that's been done, it's the BFI has a part of it, Universal Studio, whoever owns it. But it is technically you can still find it in public domain.
Which goes back to what I was saying earlier.
It's tattered.
Yeah, exactly. Some of these films have been re-released so many times, and like I mentioned, I've seen this film, whether it be on TV or versions that I've owned or watched, and like every one of them has a different soundtrack to it. That's kind of what I'm talking about here.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So, but a classic, and I think everybody knows the story here. I don't really have to talk too much about it. About this, guy, the Phantom living in the sewer system below the opera house, and he's all disfigured, and he falls in love with one of the singers, and he captures her, and there's some great scenes in here. This is probably not the most action packed out of all these films, but Chaney's performance is the stuff of legends here. And I think once you read about like all the things that he had to do with makeup to get his face to look that way, and he probably was in so much pain throughout the filming of this, and another one I'll mention later on, makes you really appreciate the greatness of Lon Chaney Jr. as this kind of horror actor who put everything into his performance. And, there's a lot of hammy acting going on by the rest of the cast in here. And, start to finish, this isn't the tightest movie, I think, but it's just so impactful. And the whole chase scene throughout the sewers is great. And it's a classic for a reason. And I will say this, Kino Lorber has done a fantastic job on a lot of these silent restorations. In fact, almost everything I have on all these silent films is either Criterion or Kino, and those are the two companies that really have done some great jobs on these. So yeah, number 4 for me is Phantom of the Opera. It's got to be on my list. There you go.
You know, just to add one thing about this, the interesting thing you say it's a romantic story, and actually some of the major, if you want to consider the horror roles in the silent era, are nothing more than romances. I mean, they're about broken hearts and just, so forth, whether it be Phantom or other films we may mention down the road. And that's why it was very difficult, because, myself with the Phantom of the Opera, okay, I think you cannot say anything wrong about Lon Chaney Sr. Boom. Other than maybe not taking care of his son when he was younger. Who knows? But other than that, as an actor, he's extraordinaire and he comes through. That film, to me, like yourself, it's a slow burner, and it just the whole key of that film is him. Everybody else is rather Casper Milquetoast. And if you buy that one, I know the one you have, I think an Image Entertainment one. There was a DVD one that was restored, which is the same information on there. The thing about that, they have 2 versions on there. The 1925 original version, there's only like a really bad 16 millimeter print of that, or whatever. They cannot find any negatives. So the one that came in the theaters at first is in a little bit of rough shape, but it's the best they've got. The other version that's on there is a 1929 sound version that they started putting sound effects. And interesting little trivia about that is that they filmed new sequences. They cut the film down radically, and they played off of. So you see these scenes of a shadowy figure in the 1929 version in the back of the opera house, and he's talking to, what's her name? Not Esmeralda. Oh my God, that was Hunchback. The woman, Mary Philbin, the actress. He's talking to her, and you just see him gesturing, and they have somebody talking. Well, that's not Lon Chaney. Even the photography of the guy is not Lon Chaney. As a matter of fact, they tried to get Lon Chaney back to do the audio, but since he was working on the Unholy Three, or upcoming with the Unholy Three, his first and only sound film, MGS said, no way. You're going to hear his voice. It's going to be in an MGM film, not some, drive-in version of Phantom of the Opera. And that's what happened with that. But just thought I'd add that in.
So question for you, this version versus the one that came about 15, 20 years later.
You're talking about the version, the print, the sound version, the original was 25. The other version is in there is 1929/30. The elements for the sound version are very nice shape. Beautiful, actually, or the best you're going to get. The 1925 version, the one that runs even longer, they have not been able to find. Very much as befallen the Hunchback of Notre Dame. It befell a lost world for a number of years. So yeah, it's a little bit rougher shape, but it's the full story as people saw it in the theaters in 25. Yeah. And in 29, they have the color sequence put back in with Red Death on the staircase. Right. I don't think it's in the 25 version, at least the one that's out there.
Actually, but what I was asking is, how do you compare this film to the Cloud Rains version, the remake?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jesus Christ.
Okay.
I'm sorry. He's going to go babbling off here. God, shut the old guy up. Oh, the Claude Rains. I after seeing Chaney, although it's silent, and the dramatic acting, I never liked anything subsequently afterwards in the Phantom of the Opera, whether it be Claude Rains, whether it be what was his name, Oliver Reed. Herbert Lom, and then even Robert Englund, but we're not going to talk about that. So, but no, I
agree with you. I agree with you 100%. I think the Cloud Rains film is very well done. It's got all the Universal tropes on it, but to me, he's kind of lacking as the fan. I don't know. I guess when you've seen this first, everything else kind of pales in comparison.
Once he played the Invisible Man, it was hard swallowing him anyway. I mean, as far as in horror. I mean, I liked him as, Lon Chaney's father in Wolfman, but yeah, it's just, he became so synonymous, his voice with that. So, but anyway, none of them match up. It's Lon Chaney's personality and acting, which overpowers everything, even to this day.
I agree. Cool. All right, back to you for number 3.
Geez, I thought I just finished number 3. I was running my mouth so much. Oh, anyhow, the number 3, here we go. This is a film that I saw many years ago, and I just, once again, it's all visual. It's insane. And that is Haxan, which is, directed by Benjamin Christensen. And the interesting thing about Haxan is really it's got the atmosphere, as I said. You've got implied torture in this thing. They don't show you. It's like, they're showing how they were torturing people in the Inquisition for witchcraft. But it's basically a docudrama in history, because apparently Christensen was a fan of the history of witchcraft. And it was like, he went off and the first 12 minutes in the film is actually old woodcuts, and he's explaining about witchcraft was going through. And then he goes into this docudrama series, which just gets off the rails, with Inquisition and people being tortured. Once again, crazy photography. I mean, dancing nuns. And best of all, Benjamin Christian is playing the devil in his own film, looking kind of like a slightly paunchy, what do you call it? Tim Curry in Legend, and this. And so the point is, the film ran 120 something minutes. And in the last X amount of the film, they come out with, he's trying to tie in the accusations of witchcraft to like anywhere from hysteria to women's problem. I mean, just why they acted crazy. It goes into the scientific end, which kind of makes you lose it on the original, which brings me to the version I saw first, which to this day, it's like, I get a kick out of it. And that's called Haxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages. And that is a 1968 cut of the film. And I'm not sure, I saw it years ago and I did not refresh my memory with it, but I believe they took a lot of the modern stuff out. I might be wrong. That seemed to drag at the end. And they turn into this 78-minute, just all the insane stuff, the witchcraft and the docudrama. And it's narrated by William S. Burroughs with a jazz soundtrack. And I thought about this really hard today. I says, what would prompt them to do this? I mean, it didn't do well. It didn't do well in Sweden, I believe. It didn't do a great job at the box office, I'm not saying. But why would they do this? And I realized, okay, in 1968, we were on like a witchcraft run in Hollywood and in England. And in 1968 alone, we had come out with The Witchfinder General, Rosemary's Baby, The Crimson Cult, with Karloff and Lee, and The Devil Rides Out is 1968. So this is a perfect time it's almost like an exploitation ending.
Yeah.
William S. Burroughs, give it a beat thing. It's got this jazzy soundtrack. It's actually the version I prefer, as gripping as the original. But that's it, Haxan. Once again, scary, atmospheric, implied torture. Like I said, they'll sit there and they'll have a guy and they'll show you a picture of the guy sitting in a chair. Not exactly, but there's other things that are too heinous to describe. Like they'll put a spike at the top of his head and a guy has a sledgehammer and they don't show you what happens, but you know what's going to happen. Oh. And it just, that's the horrifying thing. And this poor woman, they torture to the point where she looks like the old gypsy that was asking for past assault in Bride of Frankenstein, and she's all in the lighting. It's like, it creeps you out. Watch that in a dark room with or without William S. Burroughs. And guess what? You're going to sit there and look at shadows. Haxan. Boom.
Yeah, this is quite good. And this version that I picked up not long ago, Criterion has both versions that Dan was just talking about. So you can kind of watch them both back to back. Both pretty chilling. And again, for the time, I mean, who was making shit like this in 1922, right? They're showing covens and all this. It's just weird stuff that, I mean,
prancing nude.
Yeah.
Devil with breasts and they're kissed in his ass. You're going like, this is the type of stuff, you can't do that shit.
Yeah, the ass kissing scene is wild.
Wait, and he's got a set of breasts. What's going on? Oh my God. Yeah. Hi kids, let's go see a movie about funny little devils.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy stuff. It's definitely worth seeing. This is way ahead of its time, I think.
May I add one more thing about the director himself? Yeah. The director himself, once again, a Swedish director that came here, just didn't work for him here. They came here and it's like, these are people who are given free reign, they'll considered creative geniuses, whether it be Fritz Lang or whatever it may be, or Benjamin Christensen, or when they came to the US, it's like, they expect to come over here and make artistic films. And basically Hollywood, they said to them, no, you do the way we want to do it. And they basically demasculated all these geniuses that came over from German and Swedish cinema that brought something to the table. And they weren't and a lot of them went back home just annoyed. Very few stuck it out. But Benjamin Christians is also responsible for the 1920, he directed the 1929 version of Mysterious Island, which took 3 years to create because it was made at the cusp of the sound era and the silent era. So they were constantly doing reshoots to put somebody burping in the film or make a noise to sell the film. And he also involved with another film, which is a great haunted house comedy that was lost for many years. That's called Seven Footprints to Satan, which is, in retrospect, it's a wild romp. I mean, just like Maciste in Hell, except it's in a Gilded Age, Great Gatsby, estate, and it just goes off the rails. But I had to add that.
Cool. A lot of good stuff out there, including this one. Another film that has been remade countless times. I've often wondered which version is my favorite, this one or the one that came, I think, 11 years later, 12 years later, something like that. But this one is 1920s Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Of course, based on the story of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, by Robert Louis Stevenson, but here starring John Barrymore in the title role. I think most of us growing up, probably, I know myself, I saw the Frederick March film first, which was Paramount or MGM, I forget which.
Paramount.
It was Paramount. That's always the one that kind of stuck out for me because that was the first talking version of this particular story. And I think Frederick March won an Oscar for his role. I think the first time anyone in a horror role had won an Oscar. Well deserved. And I really love that version. And for Paramount, you got to release it on 4K or Blu-ray, for crying out loud already. We've waited long enough. But I digress. But, in the years since, I've watched this particular one many times, and this is pretty terrifying. I mean, and this is one of those films that all the existing prints are in pretty rough shape. This is a pretty good restoration on this Kino Classics version, but it's still, I mean, there's a lot of wear and tear to this film. And you can see it. I mean, it's got like pops and cuts and bleeding all through all of it. It's seen better days. And they remastered this in HD from the 35 millimeter negative, which is obviously not in great shape. But it is a fantastic performance by Barrymore, who was mainly like a leading guy in romantic and drama films before and after. So this was something different from him. But I mean, every time that he changes from Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde, I mean, he totally transforms his body. He's all hunched over. He's got this wild makeup, which hauntingly is very similar to some of the really extreme things that Chaney Sr. would do. He's got the elongated back of the head and the scraggly hair. And it's a fairly violent film too. And I think if you're, again, there have been many Jekyll and Hyde films through the years, and the Spencer Tracy version is not one of them, not one of the good ones. But Hammer did a couple of really interesting takes on this. But I think this one for me holds up really well next to the Frederick March version. And again, this was directed by John Robertson. And again, this is one of the earlier ones here, so 1920. So this is an oldie, but it's funny. They have some really cool little documentaries on this Blu-ray. They did a short in 1912 called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is 12 minutes long. There was also a 15-minute long version that was done later on. I think right around the same time that they did this film, another shorter film was done to kind of pick up on the popularity of this. And then there's also a little slapstick parody by Stan Laurel on here called Dr. Pickle and Mr. Pride, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, a popular story to mind throughout the history of Hollywood, but I think out of all of them that have been made, this, if it's not number one, it's number two. John Barrymore's wonderful performance as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Terrifying film.
I mean, aside from the fact that Barrymore was considered the greatest American Shakespearean actor of time, who was known for a bellowing voice and basic stage, and also as notoriously as a crazy alcoholic in later life, which was sad and tragic. But any other point is on that? Just a question for you, Peter. That's the Kino one?
Yeah.
Is that Kino?
Yeah.
Does that have the short films on there as well? or the Stan Laurel, or they have the
All of
they
it's
have
got
the
all
other
of it.
version too?
It's got
All
all
of
of
them,
it.
even that 1920 version with Sheldon, whatever his name, Sheldon
Sheldon
Lewis, or
Lewis.
something like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Wow, they're all in that box. That's a one-stop shopping.
It's like 10. I
You
think
know,
it's like $10.
there you go. And if they threw in Spencer Tracy's screen test, we'd have the whole canasta there, wouldn't we? So good film, great
Yeah,
actor.
this is good stuff. Yeah, I'm a fan of this. It's quite good.
He
Like I
also
said,
played
it's
Sherlock. He also played Sherlock Holmes in silent films. He also played Captain Ahab in 1926 in a film called The Sea Beast. And of course, you know, he played a number of great roles in silent era in some of the early sound films. Not Grand Hotel. Yes, Grand Hotel, where he plays a washed-up actor. He also is the owner of an airline company, a film called Night Flight from 1933, with an unknown Clark Gable flying the plane. And he's like the head of an airline, and he's just like all stressed out and chain smoking and of course drinking. But anyhow, yeah, great actor, and that's a good selection. You've convinced me. Now I have to go buy this. Thank you so much.
you need it in your collection. Yeah, and you know, you mentioned his drinking prowess. Apparently, one of his favorite drinking buddies was W.C. Fields, and we know his penchant for alcohol. So that kind of says it all right there.
Well, John Barrymore, not to change this, John Barrymore was the thing of Hollywood legend. That's the famous story where when he died, he was also a drinking buddy of Earl Flynn. And apparently the story goes that, and I don't know how true this is or not, apparently when John Barrymore died, okay, they smuggled his body out of the morgue or out of the funeral home, and they brought it up to Earl Flynn's house, sat a drink in his hand in the chair across the room. So when Earl Flynn walked in, there's John Barrymore, he thought was dead, sitting there with a cocktail in his hand. It's never been proven. A couple of people have said that they ripped it off and did it to some effect in a Blake Edwards film called S.O.B. But yeah, that was one of the rumors about him. And there's just weird stories about John Barrymore after that. But that's a show unto itself, The Horrible Life of John Barrymore.
Yeah, exactly. All right, number 2.
Is that my choice now?
Yep.
Okay. Well, let's go back to 1920, a film that looks like it is a high school production in many respects. It looks like, and true, the sets were made out of paper. And it is basically what I consider it is the punk rock of silent films. And that is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And that is a film that is just so nightmarish. And then, if I'm not mistaken, when you get to the end, it's just like a twist ending. It's a perfect twist ending that can be used in modern horror in any film. Kind of like what type of thing? Great sets. Conrad Veidt, one of his earlier roles as Caesar, the somnambulist. A somnambulist is a person that's basically sleepwalking.
Yeah.
Or you sleep, and he's conditioned to, let's say, take care of problems. But once again, the sets literally made out of paper and construction paper, these weird angles. It's the epitome of German expressionism. Oscar Werner, a respected director from Germany, actor who plays Dr. Caligari, went a very prolific career in German cinema. But it's just from beginning to end, just to watch the sets. You are mesmerized by it. And I said, and there's a twist ending in the end. You're going like, oh shit, that just happened. And you can see that's something that inspired things way down the road many times for many films, nuances. And Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, available Kino, I think it is as well.
Yep.
There it goes. And here's the thing: is Robert Weine is the director, Weine. He was a German director that he died in 1938, and really this is his only major claim to fame internationally, because he stayed pretty much in Germany, and he was a working director even during the Nazi era. But he he was Jewish. He knew things were on the rise, and he jumped and he died. I think he relocated and he passed away, but he passed away really young. But that's the only thing he has to claim his thing. But that's quite a film. That's not Caesar and certain other images. Lon Chaney with his mask and that. These are certain images that are just staples of horror.
Yeah.
And that's why Dr. Caligari, remade as a sound film in the 90s. I'm looking for that. No, but.
Yeah, it's my number 2 as well. Obviously.
All right.
Had to be on this list. Yeah. Dan said it perfectly. The sets in this film are just as good as the performances, but it's like you're watching this movie and it's like you're watching like a high school theater production that they had like, a $20 budget, because the corridors, like even the part where they're like in the jail cells, the doors are like triangular at an angle. And when they open up the door to look into, whoever's in the jail cell, it's not even a cell. It's like they're sitting on the floor, and the corners of the walls are all at these weird angles. It's just bizarre. Or how about the scene where they're chasing Cesare up the side of the hill? And it's got like this little walkway, and the trees are fake.
It's like a little like bridge.
Yeah,
you're going up. It's a raised bridge, and there's trees. And and it's like it's a high school. An above average high school production. I don't know, but it works because I think a lot has to do with it because Conrad Veidt is so tall and dressed in black and so thin as Caesar. He kind of blends into the posts of the building. He's as you can see it on the cover of the poster you have. He's as distorted as the buildings, and it's once again, images on there, you're always going to find a clip of that on a documentary someplace.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's it. Yeah, but that's the only testament, but good film, great film, highly recommended. You have to realize when you the silent era with film, especially going like to Dr. Caligari or anything that goes on, the first 25 years of cinema from 1895 or so to 1920, was all experimental. Everything was new and exciting. Let's build a set out of paper. Why not? We're tired of using dye. Let's create lighting, and it's just a lot of cliches, so to speak, that you see in modern films that people say, oh, look at that corny old move. Well, guess what? The new film is the corny old move. These people invented that move or whatever it was. And it's just when you watch the cinema unveil in those first 25 years, these guys were like it was a Wild West. Yeah. And they could just experiment with anything they want to do. And there's even more creepier and weirder silent films out there we probably can't even get to today.
Yeah,
that's
true.
Wild.
True.
So anyhow, that's it.
Yeah, great. I do want to stress before we move on, Dan brought it up, total twist ending at the end of this film, which you don't see coming, and that has been remade and kind of reworked in hundreds and hundreds of horror films and all sorts of other films in its wake, and this is probably the first time you ever got something like that.
But don't get it and go to the last chapter to see it. You have to watch it unfold.
You have to
get to that twist ending. I off the top of my head, I couldn't think of any modern film that would have a twist ending as warped as that, and not necessarily the same one, where all of a sudden the closest thing I will say is this. In the film Saw, or when Kaiser Soze walks away from the usual suspects and he's not limping anymore, or in Saw when Tobin, the Saw guy, whatever, when somebody gets up and you realize, you literally sit there at the moment, you go, oh shit, this will make you perform the old, oh shit, I didn't see this coming.
Yeah, it's that good. And the restoration that Kino Lorber did on this is just absolutely fantastic. This movie looks wonderful for a film that's over 100 years old, and also has one of the first ever scenes, I think, of some sort of a killer standing over a bed with a woman with a long knife. You don't actually see him do anything with it, but that also was kind of taboo at the time. So yeah. All right, number one. What do you got? I have a feeling we both have the same number.
Is it me? I'm up.
Yep.
I'll try not to take too much thunder. Okay. It's a film I think we were talking about before. It's like, yeah, sometimes you're supposed to be at night, but it's in the middle of a sunny Malibu, California afternoon. And what's going on there? Why can't anybody see this guy? Okay. And that is Nosferatu, the granddaddy of all vampire films.
Yeah.
This film here, I'll tell you, I'll be honest, at one point in time, I sat there and as I was reviewing this stuff, because these shows get me to say, okay, come on, watch. You haven't seen this in years. Watch. And this was not even going to be on my list at one point. And it's, because I felt that, okay, this is nothing more than a couple of like amazing images, him standing in the doorway and it's on the top of the ship looking down and opening up, and how he stands up. It's like, so this film is nothing more than 4 or 5, shock, moments in that time. No, I watched it again. I completely fell in love with it. And I just realized, and then, the story just doesn't end there with this film. It kept going, and there's a reason why it wasn't. But it is a take on Dracula, and it's heavily abridged. They take a lot of liberties with this. May I indulge them with the Bram Stoker story? Or do you want to save that for your? So to put it in a nutshell about Nosferatu, is that Bram Stoker, although he created Dracula and he had Dracula's Guest was a short story that came out, he basically left his wife penniless. He had no money. She didn't have much money. And all of a sudden, somebody, Murnau, and this small production company, all of a sudden says, well, let's make this. And they call it Nosferatu. They hire an actor named Max Schreck, who means horror, and they make this film with this gangrenous, this creature. And all of a sudden, like, Bram Stoker's wife hears of this. They never got permission. They never paid copyright. They never did anything. Total copyright infringement. She hires lawyers. We're going to sue them. That's it. Now, one of the things they come to, I don't know if she ever got a monetary settlement, but the agreement was to destroy every known print of this film. Get rid of it. And oddly enough, in England, I think they did. But in Germany, they didn't have to. No. This is not international law. We have to do this. Now, this is odd coming from people in Germany that probably a decade later were burning books, but they wanted to save Nosferatu. It's bizarre. But that's how it survived. And once again, public domain. I would love to say that probably next to Night of the Living Dead, or even more so, this film played on more public access TV shows and was on more VHS tapes in the bargain bin that you brought home, or you show it on public access. You wouldn't have to pay because it was public domain. Great little film. I'll let Peter talk about the lighting and whatever else he wants to add in here, but highly recommended. And Murnau, interesting about Murnau, before I close, and we'll also talk about another fellow named Paul Lenny, was not on my list, this director. And we talked about the demasculization of German and European directing that came to Hollywood. Murnau, who brought us this and brought us some other great films in the 20s, as well as Paul Lenny, who did things like The Man Who Laughs and The Cat and the Canary, and so on and so on. These guys died literally within a year of each other in the early 1930s. So the one died in a car accident. The other one died of sepsis from an infected tooth. And they were literally almost the same age, but they left at the height of their career. They weren't insulted later on at the creativity, but just genius, the way it's done. Love it. Again.
Yeah. I watched it again yesterday. And I hadn't seen it in a while. I don't know how long a while is. A couple of years, because I've seen this movie countless times. But as we talked about earlier, I've owned this film in so many different variations and a lot of really questionable bad copies, like on VHS and DVD, where you remember like that fuzzy, dark, very grainy scene or scenes. And you remember it. It's still the same even with the restoration, like all these scenes which are supposed to be at night with Count Orlok, right, because couldn't use the Dracula name, walking around with coffins under his arm in the middle of the day across the lawn, and nobody sees him, right? He's just wandering around, whatever.
He's walking to the town square with a coffin on his head.
Yeah, hey, whatever. It's the new guy in town, right?
Yeah. Nuts. No, he got his wife in there.
Yeah. So but I have fond memories. Like Dan mentioned, there are certain scenes that will forever be ingrained in your head. The scene where he goes into, we have God, what's the name of the guy who goes to visit him? I forget the name of the character.
Well, it's not Redfield. It's somebody.
Thomas Hutter.
Yeah.
Thomas Hutter in here, right? So Thomas Hutter goes obviously all the way to his castle because he wants to buy the property next door to him, and he goes to get all the papers signed, everything like that. We know the story. I mean, basically, some of the scenes in this film are like scene for scene the same as the original Universal Dracula, because it's taken right from the book. So, but the very first scene where Count Orlok enters his bed chamber, his bedroom at night, it's the stuff of nightmares. I remember being a little kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, and I remember, that door opens, and then he comes up the stairs, and he just walks through, and he's stiff as a board, right? And there you see the ears, you see the bald head, and the teeth, and the long fingernails, and you see, Hutton cowering, next to the bed. It's frightening, and I hadn't, like I said, I hadn't seen this in a couple of years, and I was watching it yesterday, and I'm like, all right, maybe it's not quite as terrifying as it was when I was a kid. But then the movie keeps going on, and you start seeing these really creepy scenes on the ship, which the stuff, one of the things I really like about this film compared to Dracula is they go places in this movie, which was a silent film, a decade before the Universal film of Bela Lugosi, and they go places in this film that it's almost like Universal were afraid to go in that film. I mean, specifically, how about like the final scene of the film, or of this character's life, right? Where he's actually finally gets next to the bed of the woman he's been chasing the entire film, and he's actually feasting on her neck. And the camera shows him. And he's
another famous
there.
still that, yeah.
It's amazing. And he keeps looking up. He's looking up because the sun he's totally free. He's totally into what he's doing. He lost track of time of the day, and the sun is starting to come up, but he's still drinking away. They never went there in the Universal film. You never really saw Dracula go and bite any necks in this film. But here,
and considering it was pre-code, you figure they have no problem doing that. This was before the motion picture code. So of course you had women, you watch the Spanish version of Dracula on Change Subject, and Lupita Tavares running with this low-cut negligee pouncing around the room. And meanwhile, in the other version, they've got, what's her name, dressed up like, Miss Crabtree, the teacher, in a Little Rascal film. No, it's just wild. And as you're saying about when you're watching these things, and the thing we have to understand when you watch silent film, and is that you have to put yourself in the mindset of the person watching the film, seeing things unfold. And that being said, for example, when they came out with the great train robbery with Edison, when that guy aimed the pistol at the camera and shot it, people ducked in the audience. When they would show pictures of trains, people thought they were going to come out of the screen. Now you start seeing all these special effects and things that are doing that ooh and ah factor of never seeing it before is not around anymore. Yeah. And the closest thing I could think of that had the ooh and ah factor, at least for me watching films, because you go out there and the special effects are out of control. You're not, how many guys have jumped through shower curtains? How many guys have run around with some kind of a mask with an axe? After a while, you're like, oh yeah, another one, whatever. The thing about the last ooh and ah I got as maybe being in the present sense was when Jurassic Park came out, and they did the special effects through CGI of the dinosaurs, and you see that first picture of a brontosaurus. I hard press anybody out there to say you did not look at that special effect and saw the way the sun, the reflection went on his skin and the texture and the movement. I personally went there and went, wow. Yeah. And that doesn't happen anymore. And so every movement, like him feasting on a neck, or standing upright, or even Caligari. I mean, walking around like he's a mime on crack, walking around. People are going like, oh my, I've never seen it. It was scare the hell out of you. Yeah. Same as Night of the Living Dead. Hey, grandma's coming back, but she wants to eat me. What? That doesn't happen. And that was the exciting part. But that's what that film still has an impact. And that shot of the door, that shot has been seen in countless videos, countless rock videos. As a matter of fact, one of the many interpretations of this film, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Type O Negative did a version of it. They did the soundtrack, and it was on a public domain tape. They got paid for it, and David Carradine introduces it. We talk about a trifecta of weird, but that came out to show you what people would do. I can't remember what the print looked like, but that's the artistic liberties you could take with public domain films. So.
Yep. Yeah, I mean it's a classic, and what I remarked on yesterday is for whatever reason I always thought this film was shorter than it actually is. I mean, this film is over an hour and a half long, which is pretty long for a film from this period. And I remember, thinking like, wow, I kind of don't even remember some of these scenes. And I was like, but by the time the movie's done, I literally sat back and I'm like, holy shit, that's just as good as I remember. In fact, it's probably better than I remembered. It's such a really, really great film. And the acting is good in it. The music is good. It looks fantastic, to the point where this restoration is so good. And this is, I believe this is it's mastered in HD from the original, from the archival 35 millimeter. I don't think this is a 4K restoration, but the restoration is so good on this print, on this film, on this Blu-ray, that there are scenes where they have close-ups of Max Schreck, and you can see all of the parts where the tape, where the skull cap is taped to him, where the ears are taped on. Literally, it's like, it's so clear. It's like, but in the early, you would never see that in the earlier prints of this film, in earlier versions where everything is all grainy. He just looks like this totally great, bald, bug-eyed, pointy-eared, vampire freak. Now you can kind of, it's like, oh, so that's how they did that, obviously, because you can see it all plain and clear. But yeah, I mean, this is absolutely terrific. I wanted to not put this at number one because it's almost like cliche, but in the end, that's the only.
It's all, I was reluctant. It wasn't on my list. Then I said, I got to put something on here. So I can't sell the whole project on Maciste in hell. So I better put something on here that people can relate to. But I put it on, and when I started watching, I says, no, it's deservedly so here. His makeup was so revolutionary at the time, or so inspirational. They, going against the whole storyline, Barlow in the original Salem's Lot, that is Nosferatu.
Yep.
Barlow in, not to break anybody's heart out there, but Barlow in the Salem's Lot book was more like the Rutger Hauer in the remake. He was not a vampire. And when they did the full-length motion picture version of Things We Do in the Shadows, they have a Nosferatu initially in the film, living in the basement at the House of Vampires. You should check that if you like vampires. It's so hilarious. But the film is great. That's that guy, these New Zealand, who's got his hand in everything now. But they have a Nosferatu living in the basement. His name is like Fred or something. And they own coffins, and he's living in like some cavern. Every time they open the door, he attacks the other vampires. It's hilarious. But it's such an influential film. And I believe there is a possibility, I'm not sure if this is true or not, because so many things were destroyed. Plus the company dissolved as soon as the lawsuit came in. They dissolved themselves. They weren't a big thing. But there is a rumor that some of these scenes were tinted. But they could not find the original elements or whatever. And I might be horribly wrong, because I think if they found a shooting script, they probably could have recreated it on a computer.
Probably.
But I think the fact it is in daylight, and he's walking across the town square with a coffin on his shoulder, and stopping off for a coffee and leaning his wife against the building or something. It has that kind of did you see that?
There's some really good documentaries on this particular Blu-ray talking about the making of the film. They almost deconstruct it scene by scene, so to speak, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool because they work directly with the director's family to kind of put this whole project together. So pretty cool. All right, you got any honorable mentions you wanted to throw out there?
Oh God, yes. Let me just write them down. I had them written down. I seem to have lost them. What I did, but anyhow, yeah, I have to give, even though it should be, I fan of the opera, I give it an honorable mention, if anything, because even just the unveiling of the scene. But as far as honorable mentions, I think we discussed this. It's the horror comedy vein, and one will be Cat and Canary by Paul Lenny from 1927, I believe, and it was based on a very successful stage play. It's about, once again, old creepy house, going there for the reading of a will. And all of a sudden people start getting knocked off or things start happening. So popular was this film that they made a version in 1927 from the Broadway show with at that time a contract starlet, someone they promoted very heavily at Universal, Laura LaPlante. But the star of the show was an actor by the name of Creighton Hale, who was an Irish actor who played kind of like a Harry Potter glass wearing type of guy, kind of a nebbish, but he somehow becomes the hero. So successful is Cat and the Canary that we're going to get back to my second film that I'll mention by Benjamin Christensen, and that's called Seven Footprints to Satan. Now that's a film that has not had any official releases. Okay. They wanted to capture the lightning in a bottle a second time. Now they couldn't get Laura LaPlante to play the role in another, quote, comedy horror film, but they were able to get Creighton Hale back to playing this nebbish guy. But the femme fatale, or the female lead, is played by Thelma Todd, who eventually became a star at Hal Roach and was found dead in her car behind her cafe in 1935. This film, 7 Foot to Satan, it was a lost film. Many of these films were lost. We talked about earlier. We talked about, Hunchback of Notre Dame. There was only like a 60-minute. Lost World was only like a 60-minute abridgment print that existed. And when I was a kid growing up, not to pontificate, but I see we haven't been on that long today, so I actually could talk. Famous Monsters of Filmland was a magazine that a lot of baby boomers read. And in this film, they, for some reason or another, films back in the 60s, such as The Old Dark House, The Ghoul with Boris Karloff, 7 Footprints to Satan, a film about the end of the world called Deluge, just to name a few. These were films in 1968 or 69, were lost. Couldn't find them. Over these last 40 years, films have been found. But what Famous Monsters would do is they would put pictures or stills in these things. And you would see a sequence from King Kong, a still from the Spider Pit, or you would see a still from this film or that. But there was always a still, and it always caught my eye as a kid. And it was a still from 7 Footprints to Satan. And this film is this grandiose witch, satanic temple. And there was like people standing there with gowns and this guy sitting on a throne. And I said, what is this all about? Well, come to find out, to give you in a nutshell on this film, Creighton Hale, who was the star of A Cat and the Canary, he plays like a rich, spoiled kid, a ne'er-do-well, who wants to live an adventure. And he's getting his father, I gave his father pays for it, but he's going to go on a safari in the jungle to live adventure. So they're having a big going away party for him. And people are there. And then all of a sudden, in a tragic sort of way in today's news, somebody comes into the big party at the father's house and starts shooting the place up. Everybody runs. And Creighton Hale ends up with Thelma Todd in the back of a limo, and they are kidnapped. And next thing you know, he is sent. They arrive at like this gloomy Gothic mansion in which no holds barred, midgets, a gorilla in the basement. I mean, crazy people. I mean, a woman with like warts the size of silver dye. It's kind of weird, and it just goes off the rails for the rest of the film. And it's not a great film, and there's a twist ending at the end. And the reason why this film was lost for many years, they found a print of it in Italy in the late 80s. And it had Italian intertitles in really rough shape. Turner was going to show it at one point, but they said it was even too bad. But maybe in today's technology, they could clean it up a bit. There are copies of it out there on YouTube, some slight restorations. Film runs about 107 minutes, I think. But they found a better print of it in Italy, once again, with Italian intertitles for about 58 minutes. It's a wild romp. And it failed miserably because it was made at the time when sound was replacing silent. And there was a sound version, but for some reason it bombed. This started the downfall of Christensen's career. But go on YouTube. You could find 7 Footprints of Satan. It's just a fun romp. It's just off the rails, weird. Even as Angelo Rosito, the midget or the dwarf, or how do I say, vertically challenged person, who was also in Master Blaster in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, and also played the sidekick of Bela Lugosi in Spooks Run Wild with the East Side Kids. So, but this is one of his earliest roles, and those are some films that are honorable mentions, and I mean, I could go on and on and on, but I don't want to tie it up too much. But I want to get the word out there about 7 Footprints to Satan, and hopefully people will, go on YouTube. It's free.
Cool. It always works. Yeah, I got a couple here just to throw out. One I rewatched again this morning, and it's pretty good too. Is it a horror film? Is it more of like a kind of like medieval tale? The Golem, another German classic, which you watch it and you're kind of like, you see the seeds of Frankenstein like all over this thing right here. But this is pretty cool. It's a story about a German community from the 16th century who is being persecuted in Prague. And one of the head rabbis decides to, sort of investigate into the mystic arts, the black arts, and brings a golem to life to kind of be their savior, so to speak. And it's another morality tale. It's like, be careful what you wish for, sort of thing. But pretty well done film. And this is really interesting. I urge anybody who is either likes this movie but doesn't have it on Blu-ray or is remotely interested in checking it out. The restoration is incredible. This is a 4K restoration on this film. And in the special features, they have a little documentary that looks at side-by-side scenes from the original German release and this new restoration. Holy cow. It's like night and day, some of these scenes. And I remember having like old VHS copies of these where you're looking and you're like, what the hell is that supposed to be? And now like you can see everything here, and it's just incredible what they can do nowadays with films. It's just really cool. So that's one of them. Here's one here, another cool Criterion release. I only saw this just recently. Vampire. And this is a film from, God, what year was this? This is 32, yeah. So this is, I believe there is some sound in this film, if I remember correctly. But for the most part, it's a silent film. And this is a Danish film. This is quite good. So very early. So this is post-Dracula. And it's kind of a different take on the whole vampire thing. But actually, no, a Danish director, but it's a German film. So this is pretty cool, one to check out. Dan mentioned The Lost World before, which, if you're a fan of dinosaurs and stop motion photography, this is Willis O'Brien. The dinosaur scenes are great. I find this film to be a little long, though. 110 minutes. Yeah. But still pretty cool if you like, 1 million years BC and all that kind of stuff. There's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Again, kind of long. This is also 110 minutes. It's got melodrama mixed with historical stuff, and Chaney's amazing in it. You just wish you saw him more in this film, but that's still pretty cool. More of a sci-fi, but Metropolis, pretty cool film. Good silent film. And then this one, another really cool German film, Faust. This is kind of like Haxan. This is noteworthy for some just really, really weird shit going on.
That's Murnau. That's F.W. Murnau, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is from, God, when was this one shot? 1926, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. So this is pretty cool too. Very, very different type of film. But yeah, so that's all I got.
Yeah. I'd like to add one more honorable mention. Remember, I told you I wrote them down and I forgot them. And this is it. You reminded me when you mentioned the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Going into the horror comedy vein, there's a 1925 film with Lon Chaney called The Monster. And it's an old, it's not a haunted house. It's an abandoned sanitarium in which, there's a party going on or whatever it is. And now of all things, the hero of the film, is an actor by the name of Johnny Arthur. Now, if anybody ever watched The Little Rascals, the best way, he was a very whiny actor in sound. Silent film, he was good. He's actually the lead in this film, primarily a theater actor, but he played Darla's father in The Little Rascals shorts, in which he was constantly whining and this and that and so forth. But he's the hero in this film. But why I'm noting this film, it's got all the trappings. It's got, he's got a couple of, Lon Chaney plays a guy who's in a sanitarium. He's not the doctor. He's an escaped mental patient. And he's bringing people down to run experiments. And he is in the film for over an hour. And he's got like this huge, giant sidekick that has his body shaved and he's oiled up like the zombies in White Zombie. And he's walking around and he's got another guy that looks kind of like, I don't know, you have to see it. Little hood and a cloak, and his name is Rigo, and crazy. But why I'm mentioning this film, it's fun, it's entertaining, it's not scary, but there are some nuances in the film from Chaney, which I picked up on, which blew me away. And there's a scene where he introduces himself into this room in the sanitarium to our hero and a girl and another guy. And he walks down the steps. Now, first off, he has a very cropped haircut like Karloff almost in Black Cat. Doesn't have the white or the streaks. He also, his eyes are a little bit sunken in his head, like London After Midnight. But the most important facet, there's one thing where they apparently think there's a dead person in the room that they're in. And he walks over to the chair he's in. And he does this gesture with his hand like this. He basically has the guy under trance. But the hand gesture he does looks damn near exactly like Lugosi's hand movements. And it's ironic because Lon Chaney was the choice to play Dracula.
Yeah.
But he makes a hand gesture. If you have it, go look at it and see that one scene. His hand gesture blew me away. And I went, oh my God. I wonder if Lugosi saw this film in 25. Because, Dracula didn't go on Broadway until 26, 27. So it was just one of those, look, I have no life. I pick out these nerdish things, it's, what can I tell you? But it's an interesting fact. Take a look at it, watch his hand gesture, and it looks like Bela Lugosi doing the vampire thing.
Yeah, I've never seen the film. I've seen stills from it because I know exactly the look on Chaney that he was going with. And yeah, you're right. It is very similar to the way the kind of skull cap looking thing, right? You know? Yeah.
Well, it's got, he had like a crew cut cropped hair, like Karloff in Black Cat.
Yeah.
And his eyes are sunk. I mean, there's a couple of, but that hand gesture, I sat there and went, oh my God, that's Lugosi saying in Abbott Castle Me Frankenstein, moving around like this. Yeah. And it's slow motion, and you're going like, okay, now I understand why they want him for Dracula. His voice was a little rough around the edges to play Dracula's sound. I don't think he would have fared well as a big star and so. He would have been a gruff cop. He would have been this, but his voice was good. And he went out some great roles, but I think the playing like Dracula I don't know. I might be wrong.
It's hard to say, right? It's hard
to
say. Yeah.
That's why we're here talking about these things today.
That's right. That's right. So there you have it, everybody. Some favorite silent classics from the golden era, pre-golden era. I don't even know what you call this, the 20s and the early 30s, right? But
peace and quiet and illegal alcohol.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So list some of your favorite horror films from the silent era in the comments below. Otherwise, if you haven't checked out any of these, I highly recommend any of them. They can be found out there. Like Dan said, there are a lot of them on YouTube. Most of these you can get on Blu-ray or DVD, fairly inexpensive nowadays. So, but I do recommend, if you like high quality entertainment, definitely check out the Criterion and the Kino Lorber restorations on these, because they're really, really good. It's like seeing these films for the first time. I mean, I'm amazed at some of the quality that they've been able to get out of these. When I grew up seeing these grainy, dark, just really bad looking prints, and now all of a sudden it's like, whoa, but never seen these films looking like this before. So pretty cool. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. For Dan Brown, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching us here in the Monster Den. We'll see you real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night or good day.